Hi everybody, it's Jessica from Chambray Blues. Welcome to the Holiday Sewing Challenge, and I'm glad that you're here. I've had a few technical issues this morning, so I'm hoping everything's gonna work out going forward here. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the challenge and what it's all about. About a year ago, I started working on this holiday gift set group of patterns, and I wanted to share them with everybody last year, but we ended up putting our house up for sale and it sold and lots of things happened. We ended up moving twice in the last year, if you know that whole story. So anyhow, I am finally settled, finally in a new location, and I'm in Pensacola, Florida now. I was in Wisconsin a year ago, and now I'm ready to help you out with your holiday gift giving. So this group is designed to be simple pieces to sew. We can embellish them a little bit. If you have time and want to do that, you can. It's completely optional. It is not required by any means. You can use any kind of fabric pretty much. I used cotton flannel for mine. You can use knit fabrics. Well, for the t-shirt, you have to use a knit. But you could also use silk for the pajama pants. You could use cotton wovens. You know, there are a lot of options with it. So this challenge is going to be Monday through Thursday this week at 1 p.m. Central. Here on my page, I'm also going to be streaming to my other social medias as well. If I can figure all my tech out, that'd be great, but we're having problems today. So anyhow, that's the plan. So today's project is the t-shirt with the applique. Now the patterns for this are available on my website. Couple issues, sorry to say. The pattern, when I had it graded, the lady who did the grading for me didn't realize what size I was giving her. I start with a 2X because that's what I usually make in a sample size for myself. And then I have her grade down to the smaller sizes and up to the larger sizes. So she graded it as if it was like a size small. Yeah, so we have in this particular download a bust of, if you go up to the largest size, would be a bust of 74 inches, which is probably great for some people if you're 74 inches. But if you're smaller than that, most patterns usually go up to about a 5X, and that would be a bust of about 56 inches, or even 50. I shouldn't say that wrong. 50 inches, sorry. I was thinking about changing it to go up to 56. Anyhow, this pattern is super big right now, and I have her working on it. She's going to redo it, and I will upload another pattern for you all. But for right now, if you do the download, just know that it's going to be very large, which is, some people probably like that. So anyhow, this is the t-shirt. It's got a cute little Christmas tree applique, which is done with a cotton flannel. It's not hard to do. I'm going to walk you through it. And that's today's project. You can also use a store-bought t-shirt if you don't want to mess with sewing that. Tomorrow's project will be the pajama pants, which have a super easy to sew elastic waist. I put pockets in mine. I'm going to share a little bit about that with you tomorrow. And you can also make them shorter, cut them into shorts if you would rather do that for your gift, make them shorts. So that's the pants. And then Wednesday, we're going to do the hair scrunchie and the sleeping mask. And I must say, a year ago when I made this, I thought I'd never use it. I use it all the time. I love it. There's always street lights outside, and it's so nice to be able to put this on, and it's really comfortable to wear at night. You don't even know you're wearing it. So sleep mask is a great holiday gift for people, little things you can make. And then there's a bag, a gift bag, and we'll do this part of it on Thursday. So this is called the Japanese knot bag, and you put the handle through there like that, and it's this cute little bag. You could embellish it if you wanted to with some embroidery on the front as well. So that's the schedule for the week. That's what we're doing. Leave me a comment. I'm going to be here all week, and I hope you will be back for the rest of the tutorials. So for today, we are going to talk about the t-shirt. All right. So my t-shirt I made last year was a store-bought t-shirt. That's why it has a V-neck. The pattern that you'll download on the website is a round neck, like the shirt I'm wearing. So first thing is I'm going to talk a little bit about the applique on the front, and then we'll get into the sewing of the shirt. So if you have done embroidery before, you know how this works. But if you're new to embroidery, or if you're thinking about it, you might have no idea. So when you download the files, you get a PDF download. Looks like this. It is essentially what the embroidery is going to look like. It also has a color key, shows the colors needed. In this case, it's only 2 colors. It's a very simple design. It talks about how many stitches there are, and what else? How many color changes, and the size of the embroidery in inches. So most machines, I think, have their hoops in millimeters, which is a little bit confusing, trying to figure out what size you're actually making. So for this design, it's about 7 inches tall and 4 inches wide. So I am using a hoop that's a little bit on the large side. It's 260 by 200 millimeters, bigger than the design, gives me plenty of room around it. And that's just the hoop that I had. So I did a couple samples here so that you will know how this works. So if you're new to embroidery, so the first thing you would do would be put your stabilizer in the hoop. Okay. So we lay this. This is wash away stabilizer. Now, there's a million different kinds of stabilizers on the market. It can be very confusing. I have done it a couple different ways. The shirt that I made last year, I used tearaway stabilizer on the back, which worked fine. It's a little bit heavier, and it's also sticky, so you can press the fabric down into it, which is great to stabilize knits. What I used today was this wash away stabilizer. It has become my new favorite for a couple of reasons. It's very light, and I like the way that it just dissolves in water after you're all finished. So in order to do the embroidery, so you put the stabilizer in the hoop first. This is the bottom part of the hoop. Put the stabilizer in first. You lay your fabric on it next. Hold on, let me find my fabric here. That's the back. So my t-shirt is a very lightweight bamboo knit. So I would find the center point of my t-shirt. It's really probably better to do the embroidery first before you put it into the hoop, but let's pretend that this is just fabric. So you're going to find the center point, and you want to line that up with the center of the hoop. And then you want to get an idea of where you want your applique to fall. So in most cases, about 6 inches down from the neck works well. If you get it too low, then it's kind of awkward. So you want to keep it in the upper 1/3 of the shirt. So I'm just going to eyeball it here. You can measure if you prefer. Okay, so here's my shirt. I'm going to spread that out here. And you want to make sure that there's no wrinkles in it. Very important that it's flat. And then you'd put another piece of stabilizer on top. Now I'm not going to do that at this time because I have a sample to show you. A couple different things. So things to watch out for. When you're doing embroidery, there's a tendency to try and chintz on the stabilizer. And it just is a really bad idea because you won't get the results that you want. So this is the applique that I started without using the stabilizer on top. And I did this because I wanted to show you what happens when you don't use all the right stabilizers. So you can see how the star is like really lopsided and kind of stretched out. It's because there's not enough stability with this stretchy fabric. And it's just a lightweight wash away stabilizer, but if you put it on top, you'll get fantastic results, versus if you don't, your fabric has a tendency to move and you'll end up with little problems like this. So always use a top layer of the wash away stabilizer. It really makes a huge difference in your project. Okay, so you put that under the machine and you push start. And the first thing the machine stitches is the star. We already talked about that. Then you're going to push stop. You're going to stop the embroidery machine from working, and you're going to put in your contrasting fabric. You're just going to lay it on top of your design like so. I put mine on an angle just to make it a little bit fun, so it looks like the pattern on a Christmas tree. So I put it on an angle, and you can probably cut off extra if you have a long tail on the end here. My piece was about 12 inches square that I used for this project. You put that on next, and then you push start. So the next part of the design is this red, or it's a red thread, but it's an outline of the tree. You can see that single needle outline of the tree. There it is. And that will stitch down on top of your fabric. When that's finished, you're going to push stop again. The machine doesn't tell you when to stop, which is kind of unfortunate. My old machine used to do that. The Designer SCE2 that I had would kind of tell you when to stop, but you have to know when to stop. So you need to practice your design on scrap fabric before you do it on the actual fabric to get the process right. So when you stop, you're going to trim around the design close to the stitching. And the reason we do that is because the next step, after you've trimmed and push start, then the machine goes back in and it'll stitch this, the edging here. In this case, it's green. It's kind of hard to see. I apologize for that. I could have used a lighter color, but I didn't think about it until it was too late. It'll go around and it'll finish all the edges. Now, in my case, I was in a hurry and I didn't make this a perfect trim all the way around. You can kind of see it's a little bit fuzzy at the edges. So if you have some small scissors, you can spend a little time going in and really just cleaning that up. And then you can cut away your stabilizer. So I didn't soak this in water yet. I wanted to show you what it looked like. That's the front. This is what the back looks like. On this design, I've trimmed away the extra threads. And when you put this in water, then this stabilizer completely disappears. But I always go in and cut away as close as I can to the design, and I reuse these little pieces because it does get expensive if you do a lot of embroidery work. So that's the back. That's how the stitches should look too, by the way. They should look smooth and even. You can trim off any extra threads on the back. If you use the tearaway stabilizer, show you what that looks like on the back. Similar, but you may have bits of tearaway still stuck on there. See this here? You can go in there and pull that off. When I go into a retail store and there's an applique item on the rack, I like to turn it inside out and look at the inside and see how well it was made. All of this material should be removed from the back of the applique, and unfortunately a lot of time it's not, especially if you go to Walmart or someplace like that. They're not real good about those things. So make sure you pull all of that stabilizer off if you're using the tearaway stabilizer. Okay, so that's how it works. Soak this in a little bit of water and you're good to go. You'll never see any of that in the finished product. So that's how the applique works. Now, if you have a Cricut maker or a silhouette machine, you can use a cut file to use heat transfer vinyl to make your design. So I've done that a lot in the past. I'm not going to go through that today in this video. If you look here on my page, I have videos of doing heat transfer with vinyl. You can get a plaid vinyl. They have holiday, they have glitter, they have all kinds of fun materials you can use. The file is a free download on my site. It's in the comments here. You can download the cut file and cut it out in the vinyl and heat transfer it onto the front of your t-shirt. So for the sewing part of this demonstration, I don't have an applique on here, but you know how that's going to work. Okay, let's talk about sewing. So sewing knits is a lot of fun. It can, however, can be very frustrating if you're new to sewing, because some knits are very, very lightweight. This one I'm using is a very lightweight rayon bamboo, and it stretches a lot. It moves a lot when you try and sew it, and it's just can be a lot of headaches to try and sew if you don't have an understanding of how it works. So a couple of things that you can do. I always use a serger for mine, but when I started sewing knits, I used a single needle machine, just a regular sewing machine with a zigzag stitch. If you change the width of your zigzag to a very narrow zigzag, about 1.0, it gives it some give, and you can stretch it. So if you're new to sewing knits, I would suggest you start with that because it's much easier. With a serger, you run into other problems with the threads, multiple threads, and cutting. You can cut holes in your shirt if you're not careful, you know, all those kinds of fun things. So for those of you who would rather take it slow, that's what I would do, is start with a zigzag stitch. So all the seam allowances on this pattern are standard 5/8 of an inch. And I have a little different method that I use for sewing the shirt together, and that is because of the neck binding. So when you go into a ready-to-wear store and look at clothing, there are different ways to finish the binding on the neck. You can have the binding set on in the round. It means it's completely circular, and there might be a seam at the very center back. You can also find garments that are made with the binding being closed into the right shoulder. This is my right, so, you know, think mirror image. There's no wrong way to do it. For technique, I think it's easier to sew it in an open form and then close up the shoulder seam at the end. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew the left shoulder together. Just one shoulder. I have right sides together. I have my serger here ready to go. I've got, I'm using a 4-thread stitch, and I use multiple colors of thread. That way I can match more fabrics and I don't have to change my thread all the time. That's my personal preference. Some people like to have them all the same. I like to have them all different. So we're going to stitch the shoulder. I do not use pins for these. You can if you wish. So I have just barely begun the shoulder here. So one of the other problems with stretch knits is that once they're sewn, they stretch on the hanger, they stretch as you wear them. And if you don't stabilize the seams, you're going to have some problems later on down the road that you'd rather not deal with. If you look at ready-to-wear items, they always have stabilized shoulder seams. There's a number of things you can do to stabilize the seam. You can use a twill tape. You can use self-fabric binding. You can use elastic. You can use cording. You can use pieces of wool yarn. I like to use fusible interfacing. These are just little scraps of fusible interfacing. I cut it about 3/4 of an inch wide, and I'm just going to serge that into the shoulder seam to help it stabilize. So I'm going to put that underneath my presser foot here. Okay. So that's what it looks like. Cut it a little bit crooked. I should just straighten it out. But the interfacing is really lightweight and it's really durable, and it really keeps those seams from shifting. And you'd never know it was there when you're wearing it. You can't see that there's any kind of a line or anything on the shoulder. So I highly recommend fusible interspacing to stabilize your shoulder. Okay, so we got the one shoulder done. Now, this may seem contrary to what you would normally do. You would normally sew both shoulders at the same time and then do the neckband, but I'm not going to. We're going to just do the one side and then apply the neckband. Here it is. So for this, I cut my band 2 inches wide, and I prefer to just match it up and stitch it rather than doing pins and all that kind of thing. Keep in mind, when you work with very fine knits, pins can put holes in your fabric, so you need to have ballpoint pins. If you get it mixed up with your regular pins, it's kind of an issue. So I don't do it. I am going to put it here. I leave a tail about 1.5 inches off the end of the neckline. And I'm going to put it underneath here, and I'm going to stretch it a little bit as I apply it. If you've made knits before, you may have used the method of putting it on in the round, where you have to calculate how much smaller the neckband needs to be and then get it stretched exactly the right amount. And that can be difficult for some people, so this makes it easier. Lining up my raw edges, I folded my band horizontally, lining it up. I'm going to stitch it onto the neck. Probably should stage stitch your neckline ahead of time. I didn't think of that. So that might be something you want to do. Okay. Almost there. I should have pressed this ahead of time, and I didn't. So I'm not stretching this. I'm just laying it on the neckline and stitch and serging them together. You don't want to stretch it too much. All right, so here is my neckline. So I've got my band on, like so. We can press it so that the seam goes towards the garment on the back, and you can come back and top stitch along that if you want to. In this case, I'm not going to top stitch it right now because I don't have my other machine set up, so we're just serging today. Okay, so that was the one shoulder. So now I can close up my other shoulder. This is beginning to take shape. So now this is what it's looking like here. This is the one seam I did with the fusible interfacing. So I'm going to match up my binding at the side shoulder, the other shoulder. Match up those raw edges. And as I sew this seam, once again, I'm going to put another piece of fusible interfacing in here. I wouldn't start it real close to the edge, maybe 1/2 inch from the edge. You don't want it to peek out from the garment when you're wearing it. So I usually start it in just a little bit so that it's invisible. No one sees the inside of your shirt. So once I've got those lined up, put them underneath here, and we're going to close this other shoulder. Whoops. All right, here we go. Okay, there we have it. So here's my other shoulder seam. So from the right side, this is what we have so far. Looking pretty good, right? You can't tell at all where the band stops and starts, really, unless you're really close. So what to do about the tail, serge tail that's here, you can turn it back into the garment and tack it with a zigzag stitch. I've also seen people use a crochet needle and pull it back inside the threads, the serging threads. You can do that as well. Most of the time I use the tacks, and then I cut the tail off, and I use a little bit of fray check on the ends to really secure it so it doesn't come undone. That would be my recommendation. And then, of course, if you wanted to do the top stitching like we talked about before, you would do that before you close the side seam. Okay, so moving on to the sleeve is next. So my method for the sleeve is to put the sleeve in and then sew the underarm and the hems all at the same time. So we're going to find the back of our sleeve here. There's a notch for the back. There we go. And back of my sleeve, make sure we got our right sides together. Wrong one. By the way, just a tip, how do you tell the right side from a wrong side of a knit is when you pull it and the fabric turns automatically to the right side. If you didn't know that, that's an easy way to tell. Okay, so here, I'm going to start at the back of the armhole, line up the edges, and put that underneath the presser foot of the serger. I'm going to stitch along here, same seam allowance, 5/8 of an inch. We're going to match our notch. Again, my preference is not to use pins. Some people like clips. You can do that if you prefer. I prefer to just let the fabric move and keep my hands pulling it together slightly. Pins really get in the way of the serger, and if you go across one, you're just ruining your serger blade. All right, almost there. So leave me a comment, let me know where you're watching from. I'd be interested to know. We have viewers from all over, I'm sure, here on Facebook. As I said, right now I'm living in Pensacola, Florida. We were from Madison, Wisconsin originally. We spent 7 months in Kentucky, and Kentucky just didn't work out. My husband was really ill, and we had a lot of personal things going on with his illness. So we decided we needed a lifestyle change, and that's how we ended up back in Florida. Sorry, I've always wanted to live here, so this has been great. Make sure that you don't get your fabric caught underneath the serger. Like I said, we've all made a mistake where we've had our blade cut into our garment. It's easy to do. All right, we got the first sleeve in. There we go. Here's where we are so far. So now you probably want to give it a good pressing. The next step would be to do the underarm seam and then the hems. So same process for the underarm seam. I'm lining up the raw edges at the hem and underarm. Right sides together. If you pull on them just right, the great thing about knits is that they're so forgiving. If you pull on both layers evenly, they should still match up when they go underneath the blade, but it does happen where once in a while you have to pull something apart and get it to line up. Make sure that you always pre-wash your fabric, by the way, especially if you're using flannel for the pants. Flannel can shrink about 20%. So I recommend you wash it actually more than once, 2 or even 3 times, just to be sure that it's not going to shrink anymore after you've sewn it. All right, so here's my underarm seam. There we go. Give it a press, and then you can do the stitching here. There's a 1-inch hem on the sleeve and the bottom of the shirt. If you have a cover stitch machine, some people use that. I do not have a cover stitch machine. I usually use what I call the ladder stitch on my Husqvarna machine. So it looks like a false cover stitch. So if you look at the shirt that I'm wearing, is also one that I made. It looks like a cover stitch. It's a back and forth, but it has 2 lines of stitching on the outside, and then the needle goes back and forth between them. So it's very similar to a cover stitch. It works great to cover finish the inside part of the shirt, but that's not necessary. Knits do not unravel at all. So you can use just that simple zigzag stitch, the 1.0 width on the zigzag, and you can use that to do your hemming. And that is the entire shirt, believe it or not. Sewing the other side of the shirt is exactly the same. And then it's just pressing. So that's it. So if you have any questions, be sure and leave them here in the comments. I'd be happy to help you out. I'm going to be live again tomorrow, 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, and our project will be sewing the pants. So get those pants cut out and ready to go, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye-bye.